That night, I stood trembling behind the bedroom door, clearly hearing every slight sound echoing from the lock. Someone was trying to open the door to my apartment. 2:15 in the morning. The security camera screen lit up, and I saw him. Marcus. The man I thought would be my husband in just 2 weeks. But the face in front of the lens was no longer the man who had knelt down, offered a ring, and smiled at me under the candlelight in a luxurious restaurant. Instead, it was a look of madness, fury, and a tension wrench clutched tightly in his hand. My finger shook as I pressed the emergency alarm button. My heart hammered, feeling as if it wanted to escape my chest. How could the man I once trusted, once loved, turn into a dangerous intruder right outside my door? But to understand why everything had turned into this nightmare, I have to tell you from the beginning. The night my grandmother returned in a dream. She had passed away 4 years ago, but in that dream, her voice was as clear as if she were standing right by my bed. "Selah, cancel the wedding now. Tomorrow morning, you must go to his mother's house. You will understand everything." The next morning, I did exactly as she told me, and what I discovered in that house made my entire world collapse. Behind the walls decorated with white roses and gentle words was a sophisticated network of deception that cost at least 3 women their entire savings. And perhaps one of them had disappeared without a trace. This is not just a story about a betrayed romance. This is a story about a woman who chose to listen to her inner voice, to believe the signs the universe sent, and to dare to face the truth, no matter how painful. I am Selah Jordan, and this is the story I live to tell. Before I continue, tell me, from which city are you listening to this story? I'd love to know how far this story's journey has traveled. And if you love true stories, journeys of finding strength amidst the darkness, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Because after hearing what I'm about to tell you, you will never look at love or trust the same way again. That morning, I woke up in my quiet apartment in Arcadia, one of the most peaceful neighborhoods in Phoenix, where houses lined up closely at the foot of Camelback Mountain. I put on my baggy cotton pants and an old t-shirt, the kind of clothes one wears when they don't need to prove anything to anyone. Standing in the bathroom, steam still fogged the mirror. Reflected within was the image of a 30-year-old woman with large eyes, bare lashes, and natural black hair neatly tied back. But what I couldn't see in the mirror, yet felt clearly in my heart, was a nameless unease. The calendar hanging in the hallway marked it clearly. Exactly 21 days until the wedding. A dream wedding. The dress was purchased. Invitations were sent. Everything was complete. Yet that morning, there was a heavy feeling in my chest, like a stone sinking to the bottom of the water. I opened the window, letting the cold January breeze rush in. Outside, Phoenix was as tranquil as any morning. The neighbors lived secluded lives, rarely greeting one another. I loved the quietness of this apartment, though sometimes, like this morning, that silence made me feel unbearably lonely. I am Selah Jordan, the chief accountant at a large import-export company. I built this life step by step, through hard work and silent sacrifices. This apartment was an inheritance from my parents. They passed away in a tragic accident 8 years ago. My younger brother is currently serving in the military overseas. My close friends are all married, busy with children and the family dinners I'm no longer invited to. 8 years. 8 years I've lived alone in this apartment. 8 years watching couples stroll hand in hand under the sunset. 8 years repeatedly hearing the familiar question, when is it your turn? I thought I had learned how to live with loneliness, or at least I had learned how to hide it deeply. But deep down in my heart, there was still a void that work and independence could never fill. And perhaps that's why, when Marcus appeared, I didn't recognize the warning signs, or maybe I did see them, but I chose to ignore them. Marcus Camden. Tall, with a deep, warm voice, a confident smile, and deep brown eyes. 37 years old. He said he owned a small, rapidly growing logistics company. We met by chance on a rainy afternoon at the bank. He needed someone to help review some complex financial documents, and I, coincidentally, was the only one available at the time. Initially, it was just business, but then he invited me for coffee to say thank you. Then came dinner, then came late-night conversations about dreams, travels, and the future. And before I knew it, Marcus had become a part of my long-term plans. He was completely different from the men I had known before. Not childish, not ambiguous, no games of secrecy. He was straightforward, clear, and his gentle touch made me, even as I tried to hide it, feel cherished. 3 months ago, Marcus proposed to me at the most luxurious restaurant we had ever been to. I still remember the soft jazz piano, the flickering candlelight, and the waiter bringing a glass of champagne with the ring inside. Marcus knelt down amidst the applause of the diners. I laughed, tears welling up, and said yes without a second thought. And that's what tormented me this morning. Why didn't I think more carefully? After my morning coffee, my phone vibrated. A message from Marcus. My mother wants to meet us this afternoon. She's excited to discuss the wedding reception. Can you make it? My fingers trembled as I typed back, "Yes, I can. I'll be there." It was the logical, the polite thing to do. But I still couldn't forget the first time I set foot in that house. I remember every detail clearly. Patricia Camden, Marcus's mother, opened the door in a spotless white apron, her hair tightly bunned, and her eyes sharp like an invisible ruler measuring my worth. She smiled, but the smile was strained. "Do you live alone?" she asked, pouring tea without looking into my eyes. "Yes, I do. I inherited the apartment from my parents a few years ago." "Which neighborhood?" "Near Arcadia, ma'am." Patricia subtly raised an eyebrow, her voice flat and cold. "That's a beautiful area. Very high property value." Her voice sounded like she was appraising an asset, not making conversation. That evening, while we were doing the dishes, Marcus quietly said, "Don't take it too personally, honey. My mother was raised the old-fashioned way. She's very wary of people." I stayed silent. But I never forgot how Patricia meticulously questioned me about my income, debts, and inheritance, while simultaneously avoiding all questions related to her own son. The only thing she said about Marcus was, "He's good at business, but he needs a steadfast woman like you." Steadfast. That was always the word. That afternoon, in the office, while reviewing a financial report, a thought suddenly flashed like lightning. What if I don't get married? What if I really don't understand the man I'm about to spend my life with? I looked at my planner. Everything was already in place. Timelines, payments, guest list, crossed out names, wedding flowers, vendors, deposit contracts. Everything was perfect, except for a void reserved for doubt. It was as if getting married was a transaction already signed, not a decision from the heart. That night, I went to bed with a troubled mind. The city of Phoenix slowly quieted down. Darkness embraced the room with its familiar chill. I tossed and turned for a long time, hugging the pillow, pulling up the blanket only to push it away again. And then I saw her, Grandma Clara, my grandmother, the second mother of my life, the one who raised me when my parents were busy working, the one who taught me never to beg for love, how to recognize danger signs, and never to ignore my intuition. She passed away 4 years ago, after a long battle with diabetes. I still keep her handkerchief on my bedside table. But what happened that night was not like a normal dream. She was sitting in the wooden chair in the dining room, where she usually read in the afternoons. She wore her light blue robe and her familiar soft slippers. Her face was gentle, but her eyes shone with an unusual intensity. "Selah," she said, her voice terrifyingly clear. "Listen carefully, because I don't have much time. You must leave that place. Those people are not good. I couldn't move, couldn't feel my body. I could only listen. Don't marry him. He is not who he says he is. Tomorrow, go to his mother's house. Go alone. You will understand everything I tried to speak, but no words would come out. She stood up, took my hand, and whispered, "This is not love, my girl. This is a trap. You must wake up." I bolted upright, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding violently. The clock showed 4:36 a.m. The room was quiet. Everything was exactly as it was. But inside me there was a tremor of fear that I couldn't extinguish. I walked to the kitchen, turned on the light, poured a glass of water, my hand still shaking. I looked at the calendar. Saturday, the day to meet Patricia. I took a deep breath. Then I whispered, "I'll go. Alone. And I'll go early." Her voice still lingered somewhere, as if it hadn't left the room. I wouldn't say anything to Marcus. Not yet. The next morning, I put on jeans, a simple shirt, and tied my hair up neatly. I drove my SUV in silence, and every time I stopped at a red light, her image reappeared. Her eyes, her voice, her warning. When I arrived at Patricia's house in Old Town Scottsdale, I parked a few houses away. I walked the last stretch. The street was eerily quiet. I rang the doorbell. No one answered. I rang again. Then, from the back of the house, I saw a young, fair-skinned woman with blonde hair, wearing a red jacket, quickly dart out the back door. She got into a small sedan, didn't look back, and then disappeared. I stood frozen. A few seconds later, Patricia opened the front door. "Selah, what a surprise. Aren't you supposed to come this afternoon with Marcus?" "I wanted to talk to you privately, ma'am." Patricia gave a strained smile. "Of course." "Please come in." I stepped inside. The house faintly smelled of old coffee. She led me to the dining room, where an open folder lay on the table. I was just reviewing the papers for the party venue. But I knew that folder had nothing to do with the wedding. When Patricia walked into the kitchen, I glanced quickly. Inside were names, lists, addresses, and a clear title, Single Homeowners. A cold wave ran down my spine, and I understood. The woman who just darted out the back door was not a casual visitor. And Patricia, she was not just a difficult future mother-in-law. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. Right there in that seemingly peaceful house, my life began to crack and shatter. Patricia returned from the hallway with a tray of dry cookies, her smile as thin as the embroidered floral tablecloth on the table. "Would you like some chamomile tea, Selah?" "This kind helps you relax," she said, setting the teacup down in front of me with slightly trembling hands. "Thank you, ma'am," I replied, but my eyes remained fixed on the folder that had just been closed. Although she had managed to shut it upon hearing my footsteps, my mind replayed the fleeting lines I had glimpsed. The names of women, addresses, columns for marital status, and sole owner. Everything was clearly handwritten, accompanied by notes in the margins. Patricia sat opposite me. I observed her. Her outward demeanor was the same as before, but there was something different in her eyes, a rigidity, as if she knew she was putting on an act and feared being exposed. "Is everything all right, dear?" Patricia asked softly. "You look a bit pale." "Oh, I just woke up early, ma'am." The lie suddenly came easily, too easily. It was as if Patricia's mere presence had activated a defense mechanism in me that I didn't know I possessed. I took a sip of tea. My thoughts were dense like dark clouds. Who was that blonde woman? Why was there such a sensitive folder in this house? Why was Patricia still acting as if everything was normal? "Tell me, Selah," Patricia said, fiddling with the edge of her napkin. "Are you happy with Marcus?" The question dropped like a stone. I looked up, stunned. "Yes, of course. Why do you ask?" "It's nothing." Weddings often bring tension, doubts, things you thought were settled. Then, after the marriage, you realize there were small signs you chose to ignore. "Are you talking about your marriage, ma'am?" Patricia laughed, but there was no joy in her laugh. I didn't marry for love, Selah. I married because it seemed sensible. Back then, women without husbands were looked down upon. But you are not like me. What do you mean? I mean you have something I never had. Property in your name, a stable career, autonomy. Marcus needs a woman like you. You balance him out. I swallowed hard. The conversation was a strange mix of praise and manipulation. Every word seemed to hold a hidden meaning. So what do you think of Marcus? I asked. Patricia looked at me for a long time. The smile completely vanished. He is my son. That's all. But that's not what I asked. I understand him more than anyone. I know what he's capable of and what he needs. Marcus has flaws like everyone else, but he also has a big heart. I took a deep breath, then went straight to what I needed. What about the woman who just left through the back door? The direct question, like a gunshot in the middle of the dining room. Patricia froze. What are you talking about? I saw her, ma'am. Blonde, young, wearing a red jacket, in a big hurry. Ah, perhaps a neighbor. I sometimes babysit for someone who works nearby. And that neighbor left without taking her child with her? Patricia held my gaze for a few seconds, then sighed. She stood up, walked to the wooden cabinet, pulled open a drawer, took out a photo album, and placed it on the table with a loud clack. You want to know who she is? Then look. Her tone shifted. It was harder, less future mother-in-law. I opened the album. At first, they were ordinary photos. Marcus as a child, birthday parties, beach trips, Christmas. But by the recent pages, my breath caught. Marcus stood next to a thin, blonde woman, her smile radiant, wearing a red dress. His arm was around her waist in front of an unfamiliar house. A note in the corner, written with a marker, read, "Last June, just 1 year ago." I flipped further. More pictures of them, restaurants, a balcony, and something that looked like a wedding. A wedding. In the photo, Marcus wore a dark suit. The blonde woman wore a simple white dress. There was no mistaking it. What is this, ma'am? My voice trembled. A phase that passed, Patricia said indifferently. Marcus lived with her for a time. Everything happened too quickly, and then they weren't compatible. She was problematic, very emotional, tried to control him. It was better to split up in the end. They were married, I said slowly. That's their business. I quickly closed the album. The sound of the slam made my hand shake even more. Why did he never tell me? And did you ask? The silence thickened. Patricia sat down, her expression now serious and more authentic. Listen to me, Selah. There are things that are best left unknown. Sometimes the past should just be the past. Bringing it up only causes more pain. What about deception, ma'am? Do you think everyone does this? I think no one escapes it. I stood up abruptly. I couldn't take it anymore. I strode quickly towards the door. Patricia remained seated. If you truly want to marry Marcus, she called after me, you have to accept that there are parts of his life you will never understand or control. Marriage is not a contract between angels. I didn't reply. I opened the door and walked out. The drive back to Phoenix suddenly felt endless. The traffic was messy, but I didn't see the cars or hear the noise. In my mind, there was only the blonde girl, the photos, the folder, and everything I had ignored in the name of love. That night, Marcus came to the apartment. I was sitting on the sofa, the album resting on my lap. He walked in with a smile as if nothing had happened, carrying a bag of Chinese food and a bottle of wine. Hey, my love, look what I brought, your favorite dish. He placed the bag on the counter and took off his jacket. How did the meeting with my mother go? I looked up. Why didn't you tell me you were married? Marcus froze. The silence was thick. He lowered his head, rubbed his face, and then sat down opposite me. What did my mother tell you? I saw the photos. You married her. What is the story? It's complicated. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't important. Not important? My voice rose. You were married, Marcus. How long did it last? Less than 6 months. She was unstable. You met her at the bank, just like you met me, right? Marcus remained silent. Did you tell her to sell her house? His eyes changed. For the first time, I clearly saw his displeasure. What are you talking about? I saw a folder at your mother's house, a list of women with property, all single owners. What is that? You had no right to snoop through our private matters. Your private matters? Is that what you call wedding planning? Lower your voice. Answer me, Marcus. I'm not perfect, but I'm talking about lies. Then hold on to your suspicions. He stood up, grabbed his jacket, and looked at me with a face I had never known. Cold and unfamiliar. Not everyone has a clean past, Selah. You're not perfect either. I'm not talking about perfection. I'm talking about the truth. I don't have to explain myself. He slammed the door shut. I sat alone in the room, the photos spread on the table, a hollow pit in my stomach. Not from hunger. My world was shattering, and I didn't know which piece to pick up first. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I missed him, but because deep down, I knew the nightmare had only just begun. And my dream about my grandmother, instead of being an exaggerated warning, now felt like a prophecy coming true. I stayed up all night. My eyes were glued to the ceiling, my breathing uneven, my mind spinning like a mill. Images flashed like lightning. The blonde woman running out of Patricia's house, the folder with the list of names and assets, the photo album with the old wedding, and Marcus's chillingly cold reaction. I didn't know which feeling was stronger, anger, fear, or shame. Perhaps all three. Dawn arrived without pity. I got up, made coffee, and left it to cool on the table, unable to drink a single sip. I was still wearing my pajamas from the night before, and the house was absolutely silent. The phone vibrated. Tanya called, the only close friend I could tell the truth without having to justify myself. Are you okay? Her voice came through the speakerphone, laced with worry. I hesitated for a second. No. Can you come over? See you in 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, Tanya was sitting in my living room, a notebook in her hand, as if we were two amateur detectives. Her hair was tied in a tight braid, her gaze bright, cold, and sharp as a knife. Now tell me everything, detail by detail, she said, her voice completely resolute. And I told her. From the first time I met Marcus at the bank, to the dream about Grandma Clara, to the single homeowners folder, the wedding album with the blonde woman, and the final argument. Tanya didn't interrupt. She just nodded, her eyes quiet, but her mind clearly organizing every piece of information. When I finished, Tanya sighed heavily. We have to find out who that girl is. I frowned. How? Social media, Tanya replied concisely. He has Instagram, right? He does, but he doesn't post anything personal. That's fine. Comments, followers, people he follows, social media reveals more than people think. We turned on the laptop. Tanya typed quickly, while I mentally reviewed the names I remembered from the album. Marcus's account was set to private, but his following list was public. There are quite a few women here, Tanya said, her voice even. Some use their real names, some have strange nicknames. Let's see who has a face similar to that blonde girl. I leaned in close to the screen. Dozens of faces scrolled past, hollow smiles, cliché captions. Just as we were about to give up, Tanya suddenly stopped. Wait, this person. The name displayed, Elise_Maro B. An account with few followers and only a few posts. But in a picture from over a year ago, Marcus was standing next to a blonde woman in a red dress, the exact girl from the album. I felt a pit open up in my stomach. That's her, I whispered. Tanya opened the photo. The caption read, He makes me feel safe. Thank you for walking into my life. Tanya looked at me. This photo was posted over a year ago. How long have you been with Marcus? 11 months. Then there's an overlap. A chill ran down my spine. What do we do now? I asked. Tanya looked at me, then typed a message with the speed of someone unafraid to step into dangerous territory. Hello, Elise. Sorry to bother you. I have an issue concerning Marcus Camden. We need to talk. This is not a joke, we sent it. Time passed as if stuck in the air. Tanya stayed with me all day. At 5 p.m., the phone vibrated. A reply message. Who are you? What do you know about Marcus? Tanya handed me the phone. My heart was pounding. Tanya typed again. We just need to know if you were with him last year. Things don't add up. Please talk to us. It's very important. 20 minutes passed. Then Elise replied, Yes. I was with him. I married him. Who are you? I snatched the phone, my hand shaking. I am Selah Jordan, his fiancé. The next 3 words appeared almost instantly. Oh my God. Then one more message. We have to meet. We can't talk online. I have something I need to show you. The next morning, we arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Tempe, a crowded place, large windows, plenty of light, just safe enough. I arrived 10 minutes early. Tanya came with me but sat at a different table, about 3 meters away, to observe. Elise arrived exactly on time. She was thinner than in the photo, her face drawn, with deep dark circles under her eyes. Her blonde hair was loosely tied, a few strands falling onto her cheeks. You're Selah, she said softly, skipping any greeting. I nodded. We sat down. Just tell me everything, Elise said, her voice hoarse, almost breathless. How long have you been with him? Almost a year. I told my friend everything. We searched on social media and found you. Elise bent down, took a folder from her handbag, and placed it on the table. It's all here. The house sale papers, messages, police reports, even though no one did anything. I opened it. The notarized house sale document. Transfer slips to an account in Marcus Camden's name. Printed WhatsApp messages with the promise, in 6 months I'll buy you the house you deserve. I clenched the paper. What happened after you sold your house? He disappeared, Elise replied, her voice cold. Blocked me, changed his number, vanished everywhere. I went to find his mother. She said he was away on business. She acted like she knew nothing. I couldn't do anything. Did you report it to the police? Yes, I did. But legally, nothing was criminal. I sold the house voluntarily. There's no document stating the money was for him. I didn't sign anything. A lump rose in my throat. How did you meet him? The bank. Just like you. He helped me deal with documents, then invited me for coffee, then told me I was the only person who understood him. I believed him. Didn't you ever have any doubts? I did. But I lied to myself. I thought he was reserved because he had been hurt. I pitied him, and that was the biggest mistake. I took a deep breath. I swear, I knew nothing. Elise looked at me, her gaze softening. I know. He calculates everything meticulously. No improvisation, no emotion. He plans it out. Do you know if he's done this before? I heard he had. His mother knows. She definitely knows. And there's someone else. Sabrina. He mentioned her name once when he thought I was asleep. Do you know anything about her? Only that she disappeared. No one could find her. Some said she moved states. Others suspected something worse. My stomach tightened. What do you think? Elise was silent for a moment, then spoke softly. If I hadn't had my sister by my side, I might have ended up like her. I lost everything. Friends, my house, my trust. Now I just work part-time to get by, but at least I'm alive. I looked at the stack of papers, names, dates, bank accounts. Everything matched up perfectly. May I keep these documents? Elise nodded. Keep them. And if you can, report him. Even if you can't put him in jail, at least he won't be able to do this again." We said goodbye without a hug or a handshake. Elise walked out onto the street, her posture suggesting she was carrying the weight of the whole world on her shoulders. I sat back down, looking at the stack of papers trembling in my hand. Tanya approached, her face pale. "You heard everything, didn't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, my voice low. "I did. And she's not the only one." That night, while I was reviewing the pile of documents in the apartment, the phone suddenly vibrated. An unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up. "Hello?" A woman's voice, low, almost a whisper. "Are you Selah Jordan?" "I am." "Who is this?" "I can't say my name, but listen closely." "Don't marry Marcus. He is not who he says he is." My throat constricted. "Who are you?" "Just someone who used to know him. He took everything I had. Don't let that happen to you. Please." The call ended abruptly. I stood frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. Outside, it was drizzling. The rain wasn't heavy but persistent, as if dragging along a cohort of dark memories one only wanted to bury deep. The echo of the anonymous voice lingered in the air of the apartment, as if every corner had just overheard it. "Don't marry Marcus. He is not who he says he is." The next morning, before I could even make coffee, I called Tanya. My voice was decisive, leaving no room for hesitation. "Sister, I need a detective. A good one, not the social media type. I need real evidence." Tanya didn't ask further. She immediately sent a trusted contact. Nolan Garza, a former police officer, now a private investigator, known for being discreet and meticulous. I dialed the number right away. We arranged to meet in a small office in an old building in downtown Phoenix. Nolan Garza was in his early 50s, with a neatly trimmed beard and sharp gray eyes that seemed to see through the table. He listened from start to finish, without interrupting, only taking notes with a blue ballpoint pen worn down from writing too many truths of others. When I finished, he looked up. "Do you have any evidence?" "Only this much," I said, handing over Elise's folder, along with a few anonymous messages and calls. Nolan quickly flipped through the pages. "Enough to start, but not enough for a formal report." "Let's see what else is out there." "I need time." "How long?" "Depends on how many bodies this guy has hidden in the closet," he said dryly. "And if your story is true, you won't like what I find." "I don't like anything anymore, Mr. Garza." "I just want the truth." Nolan looked at me for a few seconds, as if gauging my endurance. Then he nodded. "I'll call you in a week." The following days were torture. I kept my phone almost glued to my hand, just waiting for a call. I avoided Marcus using familiar excuses, urgent meetings, a headache, being overwhelmed. He responded with syrupy texts, showing concern for my health. That was the most disturbing part, the perfect performance of a man who knew how to pretend. An anonymous call, a detective with a promise that the truth won't be easy to hear. And a man who might not even exist under the name Marcus Camden. In the very next part, when Nolan returns with a thick folder, the mask will be ripped off, not just Marcus's, but also those behind him. Exactly 1 week later, Nolan called. "I have what you need. Can you come in today?" I rushed out, without a moment's thought. It was the same old room, but on the table was a thick, sealed envelope and a black folder with my name handwritten on it. Nolan wasn't smiling. "I'd be lying if I said this was the worst case I've ever seen," he began, "but it's close. Marcus Camden does not exist, at least not legally." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "His real name is Maurice Julian Torres. Over the past 10 years, he has used at least 5 aliases, each accompanied by a set of papers that look valid but are full of systemic errors. modified birth certificates, passports with fake stamps, duplicate social security numbers. In short, a master of disguise. Nolan opened the folder, sliding several copies towards me. First registered marriage to Pernette Harris 12 years ago. Lasted 8 months. She transferred her retirement fund to him, and he vanished. Second wife, Sabrina Cole, the person Elise mentioned. Missing for 6 years, no residency records. Not legally deceased, but there is an active missing persons report. Third, Elise Barron, 1 year ago, sold her house under his advice. The transaction was legal, and he disappeared before she could buy a new home. The pattern repeats, Nolan said slowly. Women with assets, few family networks, emotionally vulnerable. I clenched my hands, trying not to cry. And his job? Fake. The company he boasted about doesn't exist. The online profiles were built with simulated data. The website looks real, but has no legal registration. It's all just a facade. What about Patricia? Nolan paused. Patricia Camden is a real person, but also part of the scheme. She is not just covering up. She is actively involved. He opened another file. And here's more. Yvonne Camden, Patricia's cousin, a real estate agent. It was Yvonne who contacted the victims, talked about safe investments, and mediated the sale of assets. Elise's case was handled by Yvonne. She is also linked to 2 other similar cases. I felt nauseous, having to take a deep breath to maintain my composure. And now? Is there another woman next? Nolan nodded. Yes. Imani Carter, 28, works at a medical center on the north side of the city. Marcus, or rather Maurice, met her 3 months ago. They are dating. She knows nothing about you, and he has been whispering to her about a joint investment. I covered my face, tears streaming down. What am I supposed to do with all of this? You can report him, although the process will be long and exhausting. Or you can confront him, but the risk is very high. I was silent for a few seconds, then said, I want to look him straight in the eyes. Nolan looked at me for a long time. Then don't go alone. I nodded. I left the office, clutching the folder, my heart broken. Tanya was waiting in the car. Seeing my face, she didn't ask anything, just started the engine and drove off in silence. That night, I texted Marcus. 8 p.m. tomorrow, come to my place. I need to talk. He replied immediately, Okay, my love, is everything all right? I just want to talk. The next morning dragged on endlessly. I double-checked the camera system. Nolan had installed 2 hidden devices the day before. One concealed in the picture frame in the dining room, one in the hallway light. Tanya was in the bedroom, ready to step out if things got out of control. Right at 8 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Marcus appeared in a crisp white shirt with his rehearsed smile. Hey, beautiful. I missed you. I didn't answer, just stepped aside to let him in. He casually sat down on the sofa as if he were home. So what's the secret? Are you planning a surprise for me? I sat opposite him, placing the black folder on the table. Look at this. He opened it, glanced at page 1, page 2. The smile vanished. His eyes hardened. Where did you get this? From someone who tells the truth. You don't know what you're doing. I do. You're making a mistake. The only mistake was trusting you. He slammed the folder shut, leaned in close, his voice low. You don't know who you're messing with, Selah. Are you threatening me? He smiled, a cold and cruel smile. You picked the wrong person. He stood up, put on his coat, and left. I sat still until I heard the door close. Then I rushed into the bedroom. Tanya was standing there, phone raised. I recorded everything, every second I exhaled, not in relief, but as a signal that a war had just officially begun. The silence in the apartment was thick, as if the walls had just overheard Marcus's words and understood that something terrible was coming. Tanya quietly closed the bedroom door. The video clip was safely saved on her phone. I sat down on the edge of the bed, staring intently at the floor. I was no longer panicking, but I clearly recognized that I had just pushed open the door to another world. I had crossed an invisible boundary. I was no longer the deceived woman. I was the woman who had pulled back the curtain on an entire network of lies. And in Marcus's world, that action was synonymous with declaring war. The first thing I did was cancel the wedding. I called the event planner, the venue, the florist, one by one. Each call was both a relief and like a cut, because the pain didn't stop. It wasn't pain over a broken relationship, but over the deception, its depth, how it was engineered, its systemic nature, and its coldness. "You're doing the right thing," Tanya said when I hung up after the last call. "You are much stronger than you think." I didn't feel strong at all. I felt like I was in free fall, without a parachute. A few days later, other things began. Initially, they were minor. An anonymous call that hung up as soon as I said hello, then another with a distorted voice that only repeated my name before cutting off. I wanted to reassure myself that it was a coincidence, a bad joke, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was the prelude to a punishment. One morning, going down to the parking lot for work, I saw a white envelope clipped under my windshield wiper. No return address. Inside was a piece of paper printed in black, large type. "You are playing with fire. Fire burns brightly but kills slowly." I stood motionless. My fingers were trembling. I looked around. No one. Just the echoing footsteps of a few residents heading towards the elevator. I stuffed the paper into my pocket, went back up to the apartment, called in sick, and immediately called Nolan. "They've started," I stated directly. "I warned you." "Do you still have the envelope?" "Yes. I'll bring it right over. Stay in the house. Don't open the door for anyone. I'm coming now." 30 minutes later, Nolan knocked. He carried a briefcase and a face as grim as steel. He examined the paper, took photos, and placed it in a sealed plastic bag. "This isn't just a threat. This is a notification. His way of letting you know the playground is no longer his alone. You've become a threat." "What do we do?" "Install cameras. One at the door, one in the hallway. I'll leave you an emergency button. Press it, and I receive an alert immediately. And Selah, you cannot be alone anymore." That night, I slept with a tightened heart. Tanya stayed, sleeping on the sofa. Nolan promised to send the files to the prosecutor's office. The evidence was piling up. Not just his investigation, but also the testimony of Elise and other victims who had gradually spoken up after Tanya and I contacted them. A file was being built, but there was no arrest warrant yet. It was only an open investigation. The following week was worse. Returning from the supermarket, I found my apartment door ajar. It wasn't forced open, just unlocked. My heart hammered. I didn't step inside. I backed away and called Nolan. "They are inside. My door is open. Don't go in. I'll be there immediately. Call the police." The police arrived quickly and checked the apartment. Nothing was missing. No broken glass, no drawers ransacked, except for the cabinet containing my real estate papers. It was a mess. The documents were all there, but it was clear someone had touched them, searching for something specific. On the bed, a loose piece of paper, in the same handwriting. "You think you won? It's only the beginning." A cold rush ran down the back of my neck. Nolan spoke with the police, showed his badge, and shared a portion of his report. The officer took notes and promised to increase patrols in the building, which did little to reassure me. "They are no longer simply threatening you," Nolan said gravely. "They are marking you." "They've gone further. They don't want to scare you. They want you gone." "I'm not going anywhere," I replied curtly. "Not after all this." That night, reviewing the newly installed camera footage, we saw something terrifying. At 3 a.m, a man in a baseball cap stood in front of the door for over a minute. He didn't ring the bell, just stood still, then left. His face wasn't clear, but the build, the gait, unmistakable. Marcus. The video was immediately sent to the authorities. A few days later, someone else knocked on the door. A tall, thin woman whose elegance was as rigid as steel, forged from suspicion and distrust. Yvonne Camden, the real estate agent, the name Nolan had linked to the victim's house sales. I didn't open the door, viewing her through the camera. Selah, she looked straight into the lens. I don't want trouble. I just want to talk. I have nothing to say to you. You are walking a very thin line. You've done enough. Let everything stop here, and it will all end. Is that a threat? It's advice. You don't know who you are messing with. You don't know what my family is capable of. The police already know who you are. Yvonne laughed, not with joy, but with bitterness. The police won't protect you when we are inside. And believe me, we can get in any time. My blood ran cold. Yvonne turned and walked straight away without looking back. I sent the video to Nolan. He forwarded it to the prosecutor. The case began to gain momentum. A formal complaint was filed with charges, including fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit a crime. An arrest warrant was being processed, but the legal system was slow. The law did not move at the urgent pace I needed. I installed a smart electronic lock and hired private security. Tanya moved in temporarily. Nolan visited every evening to check in. Despite this, I couldn't sleep for more than 3 hours. The phone kept ringing at odd hours. Empty emails, messages from fake accounts with photos of my building. The threats were mixed with something else that was growing inside me. Not hatred, but determination. A white envelope. A door left ajar without any sign of forced entry. A man standing still in front of the camera at 3 a.m. In the next part, when the storm hits and Marcus speaks directly into the camera, the line between threat and action will disappear. Friday evening, Tanya went to visit her mother. For the first time in many days, I was alone. I used the time to organize files, scan documents, and categorize everything. Outside, a storm pulled thick clouds across the sky. 9 o'clock at night, the hallway camera alerted me. I opened the screen. Marcus. He stood outside the door, drenched, still in the white shirt, as if he no longer bothered to act. He stared straight into the lens, unblinking. He raised his hand, waved slightly, then leaned close to the intercom. This house will belong to me. You can bet your life on it. Then he turned and left. I collapsed onto the sofa. The fear suddenly had a form, a face, a voice, and I understood. This story would not have a smooth ending. When Marcus disappeared from the frame, I knew this was not just a threat. This was a declaration of war, and most dangerously, he had nothing left to lose. But I did. My peace, my reputation, my house, and my life. I grabbed my phone, messaging Nolan. He was just here. We have to act now. Nolan arrived within 30 minutes. We reviewed the video footage together. He remained silent for a few long seconds, pressed his lips tightly, closed the laptop, and looked at me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. The waiting game is over. Now we hunt him down. I nodded. I was ready. The next step was gathering the others. Nolan suggested consolidating the evidence, coordinating efforts to prove this was not an isolated incident, but a skillfully woven network of fraud. I started making calls. Elise answered first, then Sabrina Cole. She was not dead, nor was she missing. She had moved to another city using a different name. When she realized Marcus was tracking her, she vanished without a trace. Years of therapy finally helped her get back on her feet. Upon receiving my message, she hesitated, but ultimately chose to speak out. We met at Nolan's office, a discreet room, 4 chairs around a gray table, neutral walls, and drawn curtains. I arrived first. Elise walked in second, looking more composed. Then Sabrina, short, tense steps, as if everything in the room could betray her. And finally, Irene. I had never known Irene. Nolan contacted her after tracing Marcus's latest activity. Irene hadn't been scammed yet, but she was very close. She owned a house in the suburbs, living alone since her mother passed away. They met at an art gallery. Sweet words, admiration, promises of joint ventures, the same old playbook. When she started having doubts, Irene found an anonymous blog warning about a case very similar to hers. The blogger was Elise. The conversation was difficult but empowering. They were not just victims. They were survivors. Each person told her story from a different angle, but the wounds were the same: being deceived, manipulated, carrying shame, and harboring fear. Sabrina's story was the hardest to hear. He made me sell my parents' house. Promised we would open a clinic together. I gave him everything. When I started asking questions, he locked me in my own house for several days, confiscated my phone. I had to crawl out through a window to escape. Her voice trembled. No one believed me. The police did nothing. My sister told me I was exaggerating. I moved to another city with the little I had left, changed my name, and never dared to file a complaint until today. Elise squeezed her hand. Irene's eyes welled up. What do we do? Irene asked. How do we confront a person like him? Nolan placed a thick folder on the table. Copies of reports, complaints, fake documents, call logs, hallway camera footage, written threats, and a list of women who had been approached. The file was no longer just a folder. It was a ticking time bomb. The prosecutor has been notified, Nolan said. The official complaint includes charges of grand theft, fraud, and criminal conspiracy. We are close to getting an arrest warrant. We're just missing one piece. What is it? I asked. Patricia. Our eyes met. Patricia Camden, Marcus's mother, the silent accomplice, the one who opened the door to greet each victim, the one who asked about money disguised as small talk, the one who covered up every disappearance. She knows everything, maybe more than him, Nolan said, but she's scared. The only way to collapse this structure is for it to crack from the inside. I thought for a few minutes. I knew where she lived. I knew how to knock on the door. I just wasn't sure I would walk out safely. I will go, I said. Alone. I don't want to frighten her. Nolan objected, but finally agreed. He attached a hidden microphone and a tiny camera to the lapel of my coat. Tanya drove me to the foot of the building and waited in the car. I climbed the stairs, my legs tense, and knocked 3 times. It took Patricia a while to open the door. The fake smile was gone from her face, replaced only by a cold focus. What are you doing here? She asked bluntly. I need to talk privately. No fighting, no yelling, just talking. She hesitated, then stepped aside. I walked in. The apartment was exactly the same, too tidy, too quiet. We sat opposite each other at the dining table. Your son came to my house and threatened me. I have evidence, recordings, statements. We know everything. Yvonne and the other women. You can help or sink with them. Patricia looked down. Her fingers trembled slightly. She was silent for nearly a minute. I didn't know at first, she whispered. I thought I was helping my son get ahead. He said it was business, creating opportunities for women who didn't know how to manage their assets. And when they disappeared? I asked. Did you rationalize that too? Patricia started to cry, not hysterically but restrained. Everything spiraled out of control. Yvonne was the one who pushed him to keep going. She was ambitious. She encouraged him. I stayed silent, and silence made me an accomplice. I know that. Then speak up. Provide a statement, documents. End this. There is no turning back. For the first time, she looked straight into my eyes, unprotected. Promise me they won't kill him. I promise we will seek justice. Patricia nodded slightly. 2 days later, Nolan and the prosecutor took her statement. She confessed in detail. The modus operandi, names, dates. She handed over copies of contracts she had hidden out of fear. Patricia's testimony, the final piece, sealed the indictment. That week, the operation was approved. Yvonne was arrested right at her office. Fake documents, asset lists, bank statements of the victims. At first, she was arrogant. But when she saw Patricia's testimony and the physical evidence, she collapsed. Crying, yelling that Marcus manipulated her, forced her, and she was only following orders. She was detained without bail. The media began to catch wind. The story of the fraud network targeting single women spread across social media. More women messaged Nolan and me. There were victims in other cities, other states. Some had been silent for years. Now they dared to speak out. I couldn't believe things had gone this far. But the most crucial piece was still missing. Marcus was gone. After his last appearance on camera, no one saw him. Phone off, accounts closed, no digital trail. Nolan didn't give up. Thursday night, my phone vibrated. It was late. Tanya was asleep. Nolan's name appeared on the screen. "Selah, we got him." I jumped up. "Where?" "In the city." A motel in the El Rosario area, registered under the name Maurice Steven Suarez. The tipster recognized him from the photos we distributed. The arrest warrant is activated. The police are on their way. I sat still, phone in hand, looking out the window. Outside, another storm was brewing. It wasn't just rain hitting the glass. It was a premonition. Something was drawing near. Something had to happen for it all to end. Marcus was right here in the city. It was only a matter of time. Justice had aimed its target, but the story wasn't over just because he was found. The final act had not yet arrived. A testimony cracked the iron frame. An accomplice collapsed. A storm was gathering. In the next part, when the motel room door bursts open and Marcus's real face is revealed, the question will no longer be, can we catch him? But, now that he's caught, are we truly safe? I didn't sleep that night. I stood by the window, watching the lightning flashes tear across the sky, illuminating the distant buildings. Tanya was asleep on the sofa, exhausted after days of intense strain. Nolan promised to stay on watch near the building entrance, with a patrol car continuously circling. But deep inside me, the real fear was that Marcus might appear, without warning, without law, without mercy. At dawn, Nolan's call woke me. "Selah, calm down. Someone tried to break into the back door of the building last night. They didn't succeed, but the alley camera caught their face. It was him." A wave of cold ran down my spine. What do we do now? The arrest warrant has been issued. We are hunting him. You stay put inside. I've assigned 2 plainclothes officers outside your apartment. This ends this week. That following night, the silence carried a different weight, fierce and thick. At 2:15 a.m., the alarm system beeped. Tanya woke up with a start. I rushed to the screen. Marcus was there again. This time he wasn't standing in front of the door, but holding a tension wrench trying to pick the smart lock. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I pressed the emergency button. Within seconds, Nolan received the alert. Tanya immediately called the patrol car. I backed away, watching Marcus's every movement on the screen. The shell of the charming man had fallen away. All that remained was anxiety, fury, and desperation. A few minutes later, a loud noise stopped him. 4 police officers rushed in. Marcus struggled but was quickly subdued and handcuffed on the spot. As he was being dragged into the hallway, he screamed my name, as if I were the one who had stolen his life. Tanya hugged me. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I just closed my eyes. For the first time, I could say, I survived. The news spread quickly. The media reported the arrest of the serial fraudster accused of scamming multiple women across several states. Marcus Camden, alias Maurice Torres, was detained. The preliminary hearing was set in 5 days. The courtroom was packed with faces that understood his story from the inside. I arrived with Tanya, Nolan, and the prosecutor. Elise, Irene, and Sabrina were all present. Patricia came alone. No one embraced her, but everyone understood the price she had paid to testify against her own son. When Marcus stepped out before the judge, his eyes locked onto mine. He didn't speak. His face was frozen, devoid of emotion, devoid of any spark of humanity. He was no longer the man who had charmed me. He was just an empty shell, an abandoned house retaining only its facade. The prosecutor presented the audio recordings, fake contracts, testimonies, bank accounts, and multiple identities. Each witness contributed a piece of the puzzle. When it was Patricia's turn, the courtroom was heavy as lead. "I am his mother," her voice trembled, "and I failed. I was silent when I should have spoken up. I looked away when the lies were too obvious. I thought I was helping him turn his life around, but it turned out I was supporting his evil." The judge listened quietly, then ordered detention without bail. The trial would proceed, but Marcus would not walk free before facing justice. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate. I just breathed deeply, differently, lighter. Outside, the victims embraced each other. They were no longer the women he tried to destroy. They were stronger, closer, more aware. Nolan looked at them with respect. Tanya wiped away tears. I looked up at the sky, as if my grandmother was up there, silently watching. That night, I went to bed early. Tanya returned to her own place for the first time in weeks. The apartment was quiet and neat. At 3 a.m., I dreamed of Grandma Clara again. No kitchen, no warnings, no fear, just a wide field, filled with the scent of flowers. She smiled. "You are truly free now. You did the right thing, not just for yourself, but for all of them. You helped those who couldn't save themselves." "You saved me first," I whispered. She shook her head. "Not me. You chose to listen, to trust your feelings, to stand up despite your fear. That is your strength." I woke up with sweet tears on my cheeks, relief and gratitude. The sun streamed through the window. The storm had passed. A few days later, I began to write, not for therapy or revenge, but as a legacy. The story needed to be known, to reach the women who are manipulated, who don't recognize abuse hidden behind a smile, who think love must hurt, who stay silent because of fear, shame, or guilt. The book was titled, "The Ones Who Woke Up in Time." It was a success, but more importantly, it birthed a support network. I founded a nonprofit organization helping victims of psychological abuse and emotional manipulation. Irene became a consultant, finding purpose in guiding others through the place where she had stumbled. Elise managed the finances, rebuilding her life and helping others do the same. Sabrina, after months of recovery, dared to speak publicly. Her story was inspiring. Patricia, after serving time for complicity, accepted invitations to share from the other side of shame, talking to other mothers about the cost of covering up. Marcus was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, not for love or betrayal, but for fraud, emotional distress, and criminal conspiracy. But the deepest justice wasn't in the sentence, it was within. I walked the streets again without looking over my shoulder. I learned to trust again, with wider, open eyes. I sleep soundly, no longer waiting for the dark to knock. I return to myself, but a different version. Stronger, wiser, more vibrant. When someone asks me how I escaped, I always say, it wasn't just because of me. It was because someone from another place warned me, woke me up, and supported me when I couldn't stand on my own. There are monsters disguised as love, but when the truth speaks, no deception can live forever. God does not abandon the cry of the heart. He does not turn away from those deceived because they trusted. He does not remain silent in the face of injustice. Life, amid chaos, still has its own balance. Sooner or later, the seeds sown in pain will blossom into truth. Tears shed with faith will turn into signs. Every woman stands up, breaking the invisible chains that others don't even realize they are wearing. Somewhere in the heavens, there are people watching over us even after they have gone. Sometimes they come in dreams, sometimes as intuition, sometimes as an inner strength we don't know where it comes from. They guide, warn, and love. I understood this late, but in time. And since then, I never ignore a sign again. Because the soul knows. It always knows. 2 years after Marcus was sentenced, I stood before a packed auditorium, faces of women of all ages, from all backgrounds, each carrying her own story of survival. Voices of Survival, now the largest annual conference on emotional abuse awareness in the Southwest region. Tanya stood at the back of the room, smiling proudly. Nolan sat in the front row, still serious, but with eyes full of respect. I stepped onto the podium. I no longer trembled as I did in the early days. My voice was steady, not because the pain had vanished, but because I had learned to turn that pain into power. I once believed that love meant ignoring the feeling in my gut, I began. I thought suspicion was a lack of faith, and asking questions was a sign of weakness. The entire hall fell silent. But I learned, the hardest way possible, that intuition is not opposed to love. It protects it. That asking questions doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you wise. And that listening to the voice within, whether it comes from a hunch, a dream, or a departed loved one, can save your life. I looked down at the rows of seats, catching many nods. Some had stood exactly where I stood. Some were seeking a way out. Some were guiding others into the light. My story is not unique. That's the scary part, I continued. Every week, our organization receives dozens of letters from women and men describing the same pattern: a fast-paced relationship, promises too good to be true, isolation from friends and family, questions about assets, pressure to make big financial decisions, and then disappearance. I paused, letting the words sink in. More dangerous than the scammer is the ring of silence surrounding them. Shame prevents victims from speaking up, the fear of judgment, the question, how could she be so naive, that we know we will face. My voice hardened. Trust is not stupid. Love is not weakness. And being a victim of a professional is not a disgrace, because they are truly experts. They study you, find your weak spots, know what to say, when to say it, and make you believe they are the answer to all your prayers. After the speech, a long line of women waited to talk. Some cried, some told their own stories, some just said, "Thank you," and that was enough. A girl under 25 held my hand, her eyes red. I thought I was going crazy. My boyfriend always told me I was sensitive, paranoid, but hearing you today, I realized I'm not crazy. I'm being manipulated. I squeezed her hand. You are not crazy. You are not alone. We are here, and we will help you. The organization, Phoenix Rising, that we established has supported over 300 women in just 2 years. We provide free legal consultation for victims to understand their rights, psychological support from trauma and abuse specialists, safety planning for those needing to escape dangerous situations, financial rebuilding to help reconstruct lives after loss, support groups where survivors can connect and heal together. But most of all, we provide the one thing I needed most in my own hell, the belief that someone believed me. Elise now leads the financial programs, helping women protect their assets and recognize financial traps. She returned to school for a financial consulting degree and found healing in helping others avoid the tragedy she endured. Irene coordinates the hotline, answering those 2 a.m. calls from people who are confused and terrified. Her calm, experienced voice speaks for hundreds. You are not imagining things. What you are going through is real, and we believe you. Sabrina has become a speaker at schools, warning of the signs of relationship abuse. Her story of being locked inside her own home is a wake-up call for many young people. Abuse does not always leave physical bruises. Even Patricia. After serving her time for complicity, she joined the Family Responsibility Program, speaking to parents about the cost of covering up in the name of love. Her painful testimony helps many realize the line where affection slips into enabling. As for me, I found what I didn't know I was looking for: purpose. After my parents' death, I drifted. A stable but dull job, a steady but empty life. Existing but not truly living. Marcus nearly destroyed me, but in the journey to save myself, I learned how to save others. While healing my own wounds, I learned how to help others stand up. People often ask, "Do you regret meeting him?" I always give the same answer. I regret the pain, the wasted time, the betrayed trust. But I do not regret the lesson, the strength I found, and the women we are able to help, because I know how they feel. 3 years after Marcus's arrest, I met a man. Not at a bank, not in a fateful touch of hands, but at a volunteer event building homes for low-income families. He was an architect who dedicated his free time to designing projects. We talked about work, life, and things we both valued. There were no flash proposals, no glittering promises, no questions about assets or money, just a slow, steady connection, built on respect, transparency, and time. I wasn't rushed, I asked questions, I listened to my heart, and this time, the voice inside said, safe. Genuine. Today, sitting in the Phoenix Rising office, looking out at the Phoenix Mountains through the glass, I think of my grandmother, of the dream that saved my life, of the signs I nearly ignored, the warning knot in my stomach, the questions I once forbade myself to ask, the little voice whispering, "Something is wrong." And I think of the women who didn't receive a warning like mine, who didn't have a grandmother step into a dream, who didn't have a Tanya or a Nolan, who are still stuck, still scared, still believing they are going crazy. That's why we do this work, not for revenge, not for glory, but for the woman sitting in a dark room right now, wondering whether to trust her instincts. To her, we want to be the warning dream, to be the voice that says, "You are not crazy. You are being manipulated, and there is a way out." My story began with a dream and ended with a mission. But for so many others, their journey has just begun. As long as there are predators wearing the guise of princes, we will be here. As long as women are taught that loving means ignoring their gut, we will teach the opposite. As long as silence covers emotional abuse, we will speak out. Because life doesn't just happen to us, it flows through us. What Marcus intended for my ruin, God turned into purpose. The pain I endured became the foundation upon which I stand. And the dream that saved me became the message I carry to the world. Listen to the voice within, trust your intuition, and never, ever ignore the signs. Sometimes the people we love most, even those who have left us, are still trying to save us. Our job is to be awake. What do you think of the story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments section. If this story touched you, a special thank you will help me continue telling these life stories. Thank you for your valuable support. On the screen are 2 new stories I genuinely recommend you watch. There are many more on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next story. With love and gratitude.